Alright, what's going on, guys? So today we got some more Elden Ring details to discuss. You know, it's really crazy because over the past few weeks we have gotten a flood of Elden Ring stuff, and we know there's a lot more on the way, like the 17-minute gameplay trailer that we, the public, still have not gotten to see. And it feels kind of weird because we've gotten all this information, but the fact that that's still out there makes us feel so in the dark. But either way, I got some more stuff to talk about with you guys. But as always, before we get started, I know over 90% of you guys that watch my content are not subscribed to the channel. So if you keep watching my videos and you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please do me a favor and do that, because that communicates to YouTube that my content is worth putting out there. And I do my best to keep you guys up to date with all the latest Elden Ring news, so let's get into it. Before we get into the new details, I want to talk about the whole PAX thing. For those of you that don't know, yesterday up on the Elden Ring Steam page, a big PAX West banner was placed at the top of the page. Now if you don't know what PAX West is, it's a big in-person gameplay show that takes place in several locations around the country several different times a year, where people can go to different booths from different developers and publishers for different games, and go and play demos or watch trailers for many of the new upcoming games in the next year. So a lot of people got hyped thinking that an Elden Ring demo is going to be playable at PAX West, which if you don't know is going on right now. Now if you go take a look at the actual PAX website, Elden Ring is not listed as a game that's going to be featured there, but instead Tales of Arise is the Bandai Namco game that's being shown. Now on Steam, if you go to the featured games for PAX, they actually list every new upcoming Bandai Namco game on the page, even though the only one that's being shown is Tales of Arise. So unfortunately it doesn't look like Elden Ring is going to be there. But now let's get into the details of the game. We're going to be talking about the recent Yasuhiro Kitao interview that actually happened about a week ago, but it got swept under the rug by a lot of other details, such as the YouTubers and journalists coming out with their new gameplay demo impressions and all that stuff. But let's start reading. This exact interview comes from Ungeek, and the first question they asked was, in previous Souls games, magic can be very powerful, but in other titles, some players, the magic isn't considered to be as effective when compared to fighting using melee weapons. How are you balancing the effectivity of magic then in Elden Ring? Kitao answers, of course, we're trying to balance the different types of magic accordingly with everything else in the game. We don't want them to feel underpowered compared to melee types, however, in terms of making sure they are not too strong, we want to do things like add extra casting time for certain powerful magic or make them use more FP. These are things that we're currently testing and tweaking to make sure we get them just right. So we know magic is going to work exactly the same as it has in Dark Souls 3. And this is something that the YouTubers that got to see the gameplay mentioned. It seems like magic is going to be much more versatile in Elden Ring. Like you're going to be able to fire it from horseback and when jumping, among other things. So expect magic to be a much more viable build type. Will spirit summons play a central role in all builds, or will it be limited more towards magic oriented builds? Kitao explained, so first of all, we haven't made the game so that you have to have any specific mechanic or type of playstyle in order to progress and complete it. But the spirit summons are actually tied to the FP or mana system in the game, so you'll actually have to level up your FP a little bit in order to summon these spirits. The stronger the spirit, the more FP it will consume upon summoning. At level 1, for instance, when you first start out, you might not be able to use any of it, so you might have to specialize a little bit towards that type of play. You know, this is something I was really wondering about because I wanted to know if spirit summoning is going to be like its own build option, and it seems like it's only going to be tied to the FP stat, so you're going to be able to mix it in with all your other build types as long as you level up FP. And we do know that the spirits themselves are going to have their own levels, so spirit summoning seems like it's going to be more of a supplementary thing you can mix in with pretty much any build. The next question is, how will healing be handled in the game? Will Elden Ring have something similar to the Estus Flask? Or will there be farmable healing items like blood vials or the moongrass? He replies, the basic healing item will be similar to that in Dark Souls with the Estus Flask. It'll function in a similar way in that you can replenish it and it charges by resting at a site of lost grace. This time, to compensate for the fact that there's such a huge play area, when you're a long way from a checkpoint on your journey and you run out of healing potions, you may want a quick pick-me-up. So we've implemented a feature where if you defeat a small group of enemies, say 3 to 5, it'll actually give you a little health boost. This is to try and alleviate the stress of traveling all the way back to the last checkpoint just to replenish or heal. And I'm actually really excited to see how that's going to work. I still expect there to be items like a life gem that you can actually craft or farm, but I like this idea of reward through combat, where you have to kind of take a risk in going up against these enemies to get your health back. The next question just asked about the Ashen Estus Flask, and that is making a return. What would you say the speed of combat is in Elden Ring? Will it be more fast-paced similar to Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3, or will the pace be a bit more deliberate like in the early Dark Souls games? Now guys, he explains a little bit, but it is literally Dark Souls 3. The combat is exactly the same, just with an added jump and a horse. But when you're fighting enemies, it's Dark Souls 3. Does that mean players can expect stamina to work in the same way as Dark Souls 3 in terms of the time it takes to regenerate? Yes, you can expect stamina to work in a similar way to how it did in Dark Souls 3, except in the overworld. As we want to alleviate the stress of traversing the huge overworld, stamina management only comes into play during combat and within dungeons. So when you're out roaming the lands between, you're not in combat, you can hold down the sprint button indefinitely without consuming stamina. We wanted to give the player a stress-free experience as much as we could. I like that change, I think that's a great idea. Having to manage stamina out when you're just exploring and not fighting anything would be really annoying, so I'm glad they're doing this. What if you discover a dungeon in the open world in an area you don't have a map fragment of yet? Will that part of the world show up on your map? Even if you don't have a piece of the map which shows the information of the terrain around you, if you discover a dungeon or a point of interest or checkpoint, it'll be marked on the map appropriately. This is so that you can sort of triangulate your position and get your bearings on where everything is in relation to the dungeon that you just discovered. So I kind of imagine this as you're looking at your map and you've got all these detailed parts that you've discovered, but you have this unexplored land off to the left that's kind of blacked out, but the icon of the dungeon is still there. That's kind of how I'm seeing it in my head. What is your overall design philosophy when it comes to crafting the game's open world, especially in relation to the typical open worlds that we see in games today? One thing we're trying to do, one aspect of the philosophy when it comes to designing the world, is to make it as dense as possible. We don't want it to just be wide open and empty space, we want it to be full of surprises and things to discover. And that is exactly what I wanted them to do, so this makes me very happy. We're also being conscious of the actual level design and handcrafted nature of the overworld itself. So even though it's very expansive, it'll have a lot of verticality and a lot of multi-layering, so the player can enjoy exploring it all in dimensions. And of course, we're trying to be conscious of how the player traverses that world, trying to make it hassle-free and easy. So instead of only being able to fast travel between checkpoints, the player is able to open their map anywhere on the overworld outside of the dungeons and select a previously discovered checkpoint, a site of lost grace, and warp back there. This is made to alleviate some of that stress in traveling long distances to go back to somewhere you've already been. So basically, this is Skyrim fast travel. Personally, I think it's a great idea and it's really going to work with a big open world. And while I like the idea of having to traverse the world from point to point and have big open spaces where you have to actually learn your environment, it's going to get really annoying after a while if the world is as big as they're saying it is. Now, for those of us on PS5, they're looking into haptic feedback but not 3D audio, and cool. You mentioned during the presentation that there will be a focus on character stories. Previous games from Dark Souls to Bloodborne already had character stories, but they're more of side quests. So will we expect Elden Ring to have these character moments as sort of side quest, or will they be tied more into the main quest line or the main game? He says, first of all, the number of NPCs and characters you can interact with in Elden Ring is just a lot more than in previous games. So there are a lot more of these stories and a lot more personality to the world that they bring. But also, the main through-line story of the main NPCs you'll encounter, we're creating this to be more approachable and more understandable from a superficial level. So you can compare that to something like Sekiro's storytelling or narrative where the main through-line story is easier to understand. So like the more dense open world, this is something that I was really hoping they'd do. While I like the kind of obscurity of the NPC quest lines in the past games, I'd be lying if I didn't say I only ever completed like 1, maybe 2 quest lines on a first playthrough, and I really wish I'd get more of that experience in a blind playthrough, and I did get that in Sekiro, and that's why I like that game so much, is because you got to get attached to a lot of the characters and their stories actually mattered. So I'm really excited to see how they execute on this in Elden Ring. I know they said the NPCs are going to be playing a big role in how your story develops, and we know FromSoftware can write some good stories. So I'm really hyped about that. In previous games, the character quests can be easily missed by some players during their first run. In Elden Ring then, will it be easier to experience these character storylines during their initial playthrough? Kitao says, you mentioned Bloodborne, we feel like we went a little bit too overboard with hiding the NPCs in that game. There won't be anything quite so hard to find in Elden Ring, we feel, but it is an enormous world. And there are a lot of characters, so you may have to go out of your way to find most of them. That's not to say that we're trying to hide them in really difficult to find places, but you may have to go off the beaten path and you may have to explore to encounter some of these side quests from NPCs who are just chilling in a dungeon somewhere in the overworld. And once again, I think that's the perfect approach for this game. We know this world is going to be huge, and they said we really have no idea from the trailer just the scale of it. So if they keep placing these NPCs in like a random corner in a dungeon where you can't really see and the lighting's bad, people are going to miss the NPCs and they're not going to experience a lot of these storylines. And I think in a world this big, they kind of have to go with a more approachable execution. So I really think they got the right train of thought on this. And finally, he asked, one of the most exciting things about this game is that it's written in large part by George R.R. Martin. Given that your usual approach is gameplay first before story, what was it like developing with a lore/story first this time? To which Kitao responds, we still put the game first. This is not supposed to be a 100% story-driven game. It's a story that serves the gameplay, but this time it was different, as you say, with George R.R. Martin collaborating with us on the mythos and the history of the game world and setting, so we took that and we applied it and we adjusted it to suit our needs. And George was quite happy to let us take full reign of that, and we really made it work to our favor. It's because we have that mythos that the current game world exists, if you will. It was a really nice two-way collaboration. And if you were keeping up with the development of Elden Ring, you know how all that worked and went down. And I think this game is going to feel a lot like how the story felt in Sekiro, where you know the characters that are pulling the strings and you know your objective, but it's still got that same kind of obtuse storytelling that we're used to from FromSoftware. And I really like that, and I think it's going to work very, very well in Elden Ring. But that's all I've got for you today. Like I said, this is about a week old, but nobody was really covering this interview. And I haven't covered it, so I wanted to get this to you guys because it had a lot of new stuff that Body Video and Fextra Life didn't mention or didn't ask about. But anyways, that's going to pretty much do it for the video. If you did enjoy, leave a like on it, and subscribe if you're new around here because that really helps me out. And I'm trying to work on organizing a PvP tournament for Dark Souls 3. I put up a community post about that, but we've really been discussing it in the Discord a lot, so if you're not in the Discord, I'm gonna post a link down below. Definitely join that if you want to get involved. But that's about it, and I'll catch you in the next one.